tonight's Daily Carrie-Anne Mendoza. Love you, Carrie-Anne, thank you so much. So just to thank everybody for coming down today. It's really beautiful to see you all here. And also to let you know that a few more people are going to speak, and then after that happens, we'd really, really appreciate it. If people have things here that they would like to say, there'll be an opportunity for people to come and to speak and to say what you would like to hear the BBC saying, and what you would like to hear coming from the BBC. So if there's something that you would like to say, please do have a think about that and come and make yourself known, and you'll have an opportunity to do that. And in that spirit, we asked that same question on Facebook. What would people like to hear the BBC say? And we've got some of those comments to read out today. So, for instance, things that people who aren't able to be here today that would like, what they would like to hear the BBC say is, Stuart McGee, I would like the BBC to report on issues more relevant to ordinary working class people. The news as presented to me is a load of middle class people talking about middle class issues. Somebody else, I would like the BBC to be politically neutral. Andrew Neil, Andrew Robinson and a load of other political journos need to be got rid of and replaced by people with no links, current or previous, with political parties and newspaper corporations, particularly Murdoch Press. I would like to see more representatives of smaller parties more often. Why is it that UKIP gets more coverage than the Greens when the latter have an MP and the former does not? The BBC needs to accept that protest and direct action are a legitimate part of the nation's political dynamic that requires full and intelligent reporting, particularly at a time when transnational corporate and financial interests are compromising electoral politics and civil administration. Occupy protesters and Anons, love you Anon. Occupy protesters, as an American, I'd like to say thanks. You might be crap, but you should see the bullshit that we've got over here. Referring to the American press. Okay, cool. So there's a few more people that are going to speak today. Georgie, you hear this?
Have we got anyone else? Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to hear from George Barder. He's going to speak about climate change and other issues that he'd like to hear about from the BBC.
So I think it's really good that we're trying to occupy the BBC. It's not the most easy target in this country because it's very easy to see us to have a sort of good cop, bad cop dynamic where, because the BBC isn't owned by giant global corporations and paid for by other ones and is slightly better in some ways than the other media in the UK, it's very easy for us therefore to think that it's neutral and trustworthy. 60% of people say that they trust the BBC. So that is, 25 million people that realise that it's not to be trusted. But to those 60%, following on from what's said before, of course if you have a BBC Trust that is chaired by Lord Patten, who's a Conservative peer that was in Margaret Thatcher's government, you have an ex-Murdoch editor in charge of hiring for the BBC, what do we expect in terms of the voices coming out of it? Obviously something reflects the interests of the powerful in the status quo. Lord Patten takes £110,000, I think the figure is, from fossil fuel companies each year. He sits on the board of BP. So do we expect the BBC to really present climate change as the massive threat that it is to the future of all humanity? Clearly, I would say we shouldn't expect that. We need an independent media that isn't paid for by corporations. Surely the BBC Trust should be headed by somebody who has a lifetime of showing that they understand how informational power works, how propaganda works, that has had a lifetime of showing that they can stand up to power even when there are vested interests in the way. And as I say, we have exactly the opposite. We have instead people in power that make huge profits from the way things are. With the internet, I think that there is a huge thirst for people to see different views, but there's only so much we can do as citizen journalists. It's really important that we do have empowered news organisations that can go out there to the darkest corners of the world that tend to be in the shadows, can go out to the vulnerable communities that tend to be ignored and present their real life experience. And the reality for most people on the ground is that things are getting worse. We haven't just had a jobless recovery, we had a jobless 30-year boom, essentially, where all the money virtually that was added to the economy went into fewer and fewer hands. The City of London was prioritised to the exclusion of vast regions. A number of regions had unemployment rates peak by over 20% when the crisis hit, and still the policies we see from the government, largely uncriticised by the BBC, are basically an attempt to go back to business as usual before the crisis. We now have a mortgage bubble blowing up, and we have a share price bubble up, and we're being told that the economy is working again now, so we should be happy. I hope that some of us have a sense that maybe there's a little bit of a problem there, that bubbles are not the same as a functioning decent economy. Another enormous issue that the BBC has barely covered is the US-EU trade agreement, the TTIP. It's a sort of evil twin of a thing called the Trans-Pacific Partnership that's being negotiated across the world as well. And these are basically agreements that are designed to have secret corporate tribunals make decisions about how our economy works. Any regulation that a government puts in place to give rights to people, to protect the environment, anything that might make the costs that corporations have to cover greater, the corporations under these agreements can sue the governments for billions of dollars. They're essentially locking in a system of absolute corporate control that has nothing to do with democracy. A really crucial term here, I think, is informed consent. Democracy is meant to be ruled by the people based on informed consent. For really obvious reasons. Clearly, if we don't know what the truth is, how can we possibly make decent decisions? And the reality of our current information system is that it purveys a view of the world that is exactly what the powerful want us to hear, and not what we really need to be hearing in terms of creating a decent, more equal, democratic world. The issue of equality, for instance, is barely discussed. There's been amazing work done in the last few years making absolutely categorical the case that the more equal a society, the less social problems it has. But we still, especially in this country and the US, pursue an economic model that makes the richer vastly, vastly richer and everyone else worse off. And of course, this isn't just about economic power, it's about concentrations of economic power buying the political system. You know, every now and again there's a scandal about lobbying, so that's in the news a little bit for a couple of days with virtually no tough questions asked, and then it disappears again. What we all know, on the other hand, is that it's armies of corporate lobbyists day after day that are really responsible for what politicians actually end up doing, what's in the small print of the laws that dictate what actually happens. You know, climate change is a very, very good example of the mess that we're in. We had question time 2 nights ago where the key voice talking on the science of climate change was Nigel Lawson, Thatcher's ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer, pretending to be a scientist and essentially lying to people about the fact that we have this enormous problem. Did the BBC also on that panel have a reputed climate scientist that could explain to people the lies that were coming out of Nigel Lawson's mouth? No, we didn't. You know, this is an enormous, enormous problem. One of the reasons they don't want to talk about climate change, by the way, is that seriously looking at that problem would require unravelling the corporate controlled system that we have. You know, a corporate model where you buy a shirt where the buttons are attached in one place and it travels 1,000 miles with loads of carbon emissions to have the next bit put on. You know, things coming from sweatshops thousands of miles away. None of this could happen if we take seriously the fact that we live on a limited planet. As soon as we take climate change seriously and other ecological crises that mean that we can't have infinite wealth, immediately the question of how we share the wealth comes back onto the table, comes back into the centre of the political conversation. But again, we don't have this. I think what's happened with the NSA is that people are beginning to realise that there is this enormous system of informational power around us that has enormous consequences, and the fact that this is happening in hundreds of locations around the world really inspires me that we can start having this conversation about what it would be to have a really free press that really fought for the interests of people and planet and for the better, happier, far more inspiring world that we could have. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.